Hello, folks. Welcome to Dangerous Ideas. A little bit later than normal. We're starting a little late. I had jury duty today, and that's why I could not do the live stream. And then I was like, well, all right, I'll just have to miss a day. And then, of course, yeah, it's the day after, 2 days after Joe Biden decides to step down running for president. And now all of a sudden, Kamala Harris is being anointed without anybody voting for her to be the nominee. And I decided I had to give you something during this breaking news cycle. So this will be a short live stream just to just to discuss for a few minutes the breaking news. But whenever something like this happens, whenever there's breaking news that is covered by all the mainstream media and all of the independent media, and everybody just sits there on the screen going, I thought that was a pretty solid impersonation. Whenever that happens, I always think, well, they could get that from CNN, that Biden's not running, that Kamala Harris is suddenly the presumed nominee without anyone voting for her. And so what is it that I can bring that's at least slightly different from that? It doesn't mean no one else is discussing the things I'm discussing, but at least slightly different. And one of the things, it looks like my internet's slow. I hope it's not slow for you guys, but it's looking pretty crappy on my end at the moment. Hope it looks good for you. Anyway, but one of the things I figured I could discuss is the fact that this is the third federal election in a row that the DNC is now basically putting in a presidential nominee that the people of America, the Democrats of America, who are supposed to have some say in this process, who are supposed to at some point decide who that presidential nominee is, are being thwarted. This is the third one in a row. Assuming that they continue, that the ruling elites, the Democrat elites, continue with the direction they're headed, which is to insert Kamala Harris in as the nominee for president again, so far, without a soul voting for her to be that. Thank you, Dan, for the donation. Appreciate it. Goddamn right. So now, I could sit here and talk about how awful Joe Biden is for hours, but you guys know that. You stop with everyone going, thank you, Joe Biden, for all your service. It wasn't fucking service. That's not called service, okay? He didn't bring you your dish at a restaurant. This was not service. This was him as a sociopath spending decades and decades of his life serving the ruling elite, enriching himself and his family, as well as enjoying the power and committing genocide. I think really, let's not dig too far back into the closet. Let's just say his legacy will be genocide. We can just leave it that. Past few years, we'll give him a break on all that stuff he did back in the 90s, doubling the prison population, creating the most racist prison state in the world. We can put all that aside and many other things, encouraging Democrats to vote and further the war in Iraq that killed 1 million people. We can push all past all of that, the Patriot Act, which he claims to have written. We can push past all of that, say, bygones be bygones. Bidens be bygones. We can do all of that and just say, you know what, last few years, we'll just give him the last few years genocide. That should be his legacy. I can discuss that, but you probably can get that somewhere else. I could also spend a long time discussing what garbage Kamala Harris is, but you can probably get that from a lot of other places as well. That's one of the things that Fox News is pretty solid on, if you want to learn how terrible Kamala Harris is. Although they'll probably say she's like a Marxist and a socialist or something, rather than say, oh, no, she's actually a far right-wing lunatic who has furthered and been at the top of the police state in this country. Again, the largest prison state in the world. She was California's top cop, and California being the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, if it were a nation, that means she was the top police officer of the 5th or 6th largest country in the world, if California were counted as a country and you were looking at economics. Anyway, but so now they are inserting her in, the ruling elite, the richest of the rich, the billionaires, and let's be fair, multi-millionaires are inserting her in as if it is a done deal, as if she is now the nominee. The entire apparatus, which is massive, the entire apparatus for the campaign of any presidential candidate goes essentially to her. It's now in her hands. From what I've heard, the money, the bank is in her hands as well in terms of her campaign. It basically gets allotted to her. Now, she is not technically the nominee for president. Technically, there's a convention. Technically, people are supposed to vote at that convention. But if the ruling elite of the Democratic Party have inserted her in, have put her at the top of the machine, they're not having any primary, not that they had any fair primary to begin with, which is what I'm going to get to in a second. So doing all of that, once they get to this actual convention, which is a few weeks away, it'll probably be too late. Now, they could do like the old days and have an open convention where literally in the auditorium, in the halls, in the venue, you have people screaming over who's going to be nominated, who's going to vote for who, and who's going to be the presidential nominee for the party. But we are way past those times when the ruling elite would ever allow for that to happen. And, guess what? Someone nominates like Bernie Sanders at the convention. All of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. People want Bernie Sanders. And then before you know it, Bernie Sanders is the presidential nominee. And the ruling elite go, oh, my God, what happened? Yeah, we are past those days. So right now, they are sealing up the fact that Kamala Harris will be the presidential nominee. And I'll just play, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Harris because I feel like you can get a lot of that elsewhere and you don't need it for, to me to just add on to stuff you've already heard. But I'll just play one clip before we get to the larger point about how this is the third straight election that the DNC has ended up essentially rigging out from under the American people. I want to play one clip of Kamala Harris on Israel and just what garbage she is. She's somehow more genocidal than Biden, and just how phony she is on it as well.
Madam Vice President, Israel bombed the densely populated Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza for the second time in 2 days yesterday. Has the Biden-Harris administration reached out to discuss with Israel the bombing of the camp? And do you and President Biden consider the camp a legitimate military target or is it acceptable collateral damage in Israel's efforts to defeat Hamas?
In case the reporter was a little quiet, he just said Israel's just bombed this refugee camp for the second time in a few days, and they're killing innocent people. And is that a legitimate military target?
So let me start with this. I have seen, as you have, I'm sure, the images, the photographs of.
Let me start with this means let me ignore your question. I'm just going to translate because I know she's speaking another language. She's speaking press conference language. And so I'll just deal with translating. Let me start with this means let me ignore your question.
The loss of civilian life in Gaza.
She's worried about that.
Heartbreaking.
But we're going to keep sending missiles every 36 hours to ensure it keeps happening.
Injury and death to children. I have a friend who I talked with recently who has family in Gaza and has lost a number of the members of her family.
And I told her we're going to keep bombing your motherfucking family. That's what we're going to keep doing. Good friend of mine that I'm facilitating the obliteration of your family. Boy, if those are her friends, you don't want to be her enemy.
Civilians. So let me start by saying that it is absolutely tragic when there is ever anywhere any loss of innocent life, of innocent civilians, of children. And there is no word that I can offer you that that justifies any other feeling in terms.
Justify the feeling. There is a word you could offer. How about I'm going to do everything I can to stop this? I'm going to be, because I have no power as the vice president, I'm going to be screaming at that old man every goddamn minute to stop the missile shipments to obliterate children. But of course, she wouldn't do that because if you read and watch her words, she's actually, if it's possible, more right-wing and war hawkish on obliterating Gaza, on being pro-Israel than even Joe Biden is.
In terms of the loss of that life, it's tragic.
End of answer. Did not even begin to address the question. Do you believe a refugee camp of innocent civilians is a legitimate military target?
I just want to follow up specifically with the refugee camp. Do you think that that is a legitimate military target, that it's an acceptable?
We are not telling Israel how it should conduct this war, and so I'm not going to speak to that.
I'm not going to speak to whether they should be using our bombs to murder children. 70% of all those killed in Gaza are women and children, and like 45% are just children. It's absolutely a genocide. By the way, we're coming up on 300 days of this genocide, and she says, I'm not going to tell Israel how to conduct its war over there. Oh, that's interesting, because you seem fine to tell other people what they should be doing around the world, but you're going to keep shipping them missiles. This would be the perfect analogy for this, and I've used it before, would be if there were a mass shooter and he's inside a mall and he's just killing loads of people, and you gave him the gun and the ammo, and you're standing outside, and so you're not in there, where he's firing, but you're talking to the press out front, and they're going, how could this be happening? He's killing all these innocent people. And you go, yeah, it is tragic. It feels really bad. I can't even give you words to describe how that could feel for what's going on in that mall right now. But just hold on 1 second. I got to give him some more ammo. He's out. Hold on 1 second. And then you just shovel more ammo into the window, and he says, thanks, I appreciate it. And he goes back, and then you turn back to the press and you go, I'm not going to tell him how to conduct his business inside that mall, but I'll just say it hurts to see the loss of so much life. Would you look at that person standing outside that mall and go, oh, he seems to care about the people inside, and what more can you ask? What more can you ask but that kind of care? Thank you, Carl, for becoming a member on YouTube. Solidarity, and thank you for supporting this show. Okay, let me get to a point I have not heard made enough, at least, about the fact that this is, so we saw, what I was just basically detailing is that the DNC, the Democratic elite, which is not just the DMC, but Democratic elite is basically trying to insert Kamala Harris as the new presidential nominee. And this will be the third straight election where there's barely even the guise of a primary. There's barely even the theatrics of America gets to choose who this presidential candidate is. Keep in mind, they forced Biden down our throats, as horrific as an image of that is. They forced him down our throats over the past several months during whatever primary there was, which essentially, again, was non-existent. He did not have debates. They basically drummed out. They basically drummed out RFK Jr. from running as a Democrat. You can argue amongst yourself as to whether RFK Jr. is a Democrat or not, but they drummed him out by various ways. But one of them was threatening that he would have to pay. He and Marianne Williamson would have to pay for the primaries out of their own pockets. Now, they may have a lot of money, but no one is really jumping at the idea of spending, I don't know, whether it was 10, 20, 30 million dollars, millions and millions of dollars out of their own pocket to lose to Joe Biden in a primary, because of course it would be rigged in other ways. So they forced Biden down our throats. And then we get to this point, which everyone feels was inevitable, that he steps down and is not running. And all of a sudden there's no primary, and Kamala Harris is announced as the candidate. But so this is third straight election. Let's go back to, let's see. We'll go back to 2020 first. Well, maybe I'll do 2016 first. We'll go back to 2016 first, when, as most of you remember, was the time where it seemed most like Bernie Sanders may actually win this primary. He did rallies with tens of thousands, but often over 100,000 people, like in New York, gathering to hear him speak. And the Democratic Party was shaking in their boots, shitting their pantaloons that he was going to win. And so I covered it day by day by day on Redacted Tonight, just every way it was rigged. Of course, the exit polls were off from the machines. I showed evidence of them auditing the machines. In some states, it's required for these machines to be audited after the vote. And we saw evidence of people changing the numbers on the machines in order to make them fit as if they were legitimate. And here's, again, you can go back to mainstream media. Some of it's been kind of buried, but it still exists. Here's just a mainstream news article. New York City and State. New York City, and this was proven in courts, purged 200,000 voters, likely Bernie voters, in 2016. And when you say the phrase likely Bernie voters, people go, how could you know? Well, certain areas of New York, like Brooklyn, were far more likely to vote for Bernie. Certain areas of even Brooklyn are far more likely to vote for Bernie because they're younger, that kind of thing. And New York City just purged them all from voting. They went in to vote and they were told they were not registered to vote. And ultimately in court, they were found guilty of doing this in 2016. Hundreds of thousands of voters. That's just, one example of many. In California, they did the old placebo ballot trick where anybody who came in, or not anybody, but many people who came in to vote for Bernie Sanders, they said, oh, you have to vote on a provisional ballot or you're not on the list. So you got to vote on a provisional ballot, but don't worry, it'll get counted. Well, no, provisional ballots are largely not counted. And if they get counted, they get counted so long after the actual vote that it's over, that no one's going to change their mind. Imagine they declare Hillary Clinton won. She's now running in the primary the main election against Donald Trump, and it's been a month. And then they go, oh, hey, look, we just counted the provisional ballots, and maybe Bernie did win. Nobody would care. Like, it would just be way too late, and that's their goal, is for nobody to care. So really, provisional ballots are placebo ballots. Again, these are just pieces of examples of how thoroughly it was rigged in 2016. Then you get to, and of course you have the shadow app that was designed to, well, that was 2020. So then you get to 2020, and in 2020 they realized that, sorry, I forgot to bring you one more article. This is how accepted it is that 2016 was rigged. Even Elizabeth Warren, mainstream Democrat in Congress, Elizabeth Warren, and Donna Brazile, former head of the DNC, and this is according to Washington Post, now agree that the 2016 Democratic primary was rigged. Elizabeth Warren and Donna Brazile. These are two mainstream Democrats in the power. They are the elite. One of them was the head of the DNC. They admitted 2016 was rigged, okay? According to the Washington Post. So when you say 2016 was rigged and people side-eye you because they didn't really pay attention to it then, you can say, go ask Donna Brazile. Go ask the former head of the DNC. Go ask the Washington Post. Go ask Elizabeth Warren. Okay. And of course, I mention it all the time, but of course there was the lawsuit that happened a couple of years later or a year later in which the DNC lawyers admitted in court that they have no right. No obligation to have a legitimate primary. They can just pick who the nominee is. They don't owe America anything. And that's what they're doing this time. They're just picking Kamala Harris. The elite are. Okay, so then you get to 2020, the 2020 election. And yet again, Bernie Sanders looks like he's likely to win the nomination. You have all these milquetoast, pathetic Democrats running against him. He's the only one that's even slightly left-wing, except, some argue Elizabeth Warren. If you really understand her, she's not left-wing, but people get confused. Anyway, so some said Elizabeth Warren was kind of left-wing. So the only person taking any votes from Bernie in that primary was Elizabeth Warren. There was no one else even close to him in terms of what he was talking about and the things he was making part of his platform. And so then all within one day, basically, and Biden is getting torn apart, by the way. And also there's they knew that in Iowa and Nevada, the two early caucus states, that if Bernie won both of those, then the mainstream Democrats would be just screwed because Bernie would be running away with it. So what did they do? They invented the shadow app. Literally called the shadow app, which sounds like a scam, and it was a scam. And it told all the Iowa caucuses, when you get your numbers from your caucus, type them into this app we just made up yesterday and send them away to headquarters via app. And so they go, okay, we're here in a goddamn barn or wherever the fuck they do that shit. Dude, it's old school, but it's better than our imaginary machines. So they're in a barn and they type in, okay, you got 100 people for Bernie and 30 for Hillary or whatever. No, it wasn't Hillary, but Biden or whatever. Bernie's killing it. And they type it in the app. The app crashes and just basically deletes everything, which was its design. I mean, that was the point of it. It was made with Pete Buttigieg was connected to the people that put it together. Anyway, in the time it takes to go, oh my God, the app's broken and we don't know what happened in the Iowa caucus, Buttigieg steps out and says he won. He didn't win at all, but he just stepped out and said he won. So all it did was muddy the waters, which is exactly what they needed. They just needed Bernie's thrust in the early states to be muddied so that they could say, we don't know who's winning. And then they could win the other, dump enough money into the other votes and rig them enough to have him lose. But despite the muddiness, and then Nevada was supposed to use the shadow app, but they saw the catastrophe of Iowa and they didn't use it. So that got screwed. That plan to rig it got screwed. Anyway, despite all that, Bernie is still winning. And then what happens? Obama and other ruling elites of the Democratic Party convince Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, I think Kamala Harris a few days before maybe, they convinced the other leading Democrats to drop out and all endorse Joe Biden. And they're told they're going to be given prime positions. Buttigieg is then made Secretary of Transportation, which he has just done a knockdown, drag-out job, hadn't he? I heard he sits on the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge here in Baltimore every night and just quietly cries to himself at the side of that bridge, because he cares. He cares. Anyway, they all drop out and they endorse Joe Biden. The only one who doesn't drop out is Elizabeth Warren, because the ruling elite of the Democratic Party knew that Elizabeth Warren was the only one pulling votes from Bernie. Now, again, she's not left-wing, but people thought she was. So they leave her in the race. So it's just Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and Joe Biden. And it, along with various other rigging, along with all the money they dumped into it, all these things together successfully beat Bernie Sanders. All this form of rigging successfully beat Bernie Sanders yet again. And, and I said that would happen. I didn't even, whereas 2016, I thought there was a chance that Bernie just wins so many votes, they can't even figure out how to rig it. 2020, I knew it was over. Also, you'll notice in 2020, they didn't have the exit polls that we were relying on in the 2016. They got rid of them all because we noticed they weren't adding up. And they were like, let's get rid of all those exit polls. So they basically just gutted all the exit polls. And so that we couldn't prove what was going down in each state, in each primary. So you got 2016, 2020, and now here we are today and yesterday seeing that they're doing it again. The DNC, the Democratic elite, are just deciding who the presidential candidate is without any input from the American people because they don't give a fuck about you or us. And in case you're new to my stuff and you don't realize it, this does not mean I'm saying the Republicans are good and just and right. They are the worst, disgusting, parasitic, militaristic, murderous, psychopathic, and the only thing that competes with the actual grime and decomposing, rotten raccoon carcass of the Republican Party is the Democratic Party. So, in case you needed to know where my thoughts stand, that's where they are. But there's us, the people, and we're better than all that. We're better than all that. We're better than all these pieces of garbage. And, maybe large-scale protests, large-scale civil disobedience can upend the corporate state. And in case you want to be a part of that, this coming Wednesday, thousands are going to Washington, D.C. to protest the butcher-in-chief, Netanyahu, arriving to speak to Congress. Netanyahu, of course, being one of the only world leaders that is invited to speak to our Congress, the other one being Zelensky. Very few world leaders of states are invited to speak to Congress, but this Congress is so bought off and so in line with this genocide that they are not worried, and they're excited to have Netanyahu, who has killed 40,000 people in the past 300 days, although it's really more like 200,000 people if you count disease and famine, which disease is intentional. They bombed all the hospitals. They obliterated the ability to deal with disease, not to mention people get sick more when they have their homes and families blown up and don't have any food. So this is all by design. The disease is by design. The not allowing hospitals to help people is by design. And Netanyahu has murdered 200,000 innocent people over the past 300 days. So this Wednesday, thousands upon thousands of people are converging on Washington, D.C. And I think it starts pretty early because I think his speech is pretty early. So, and they're probably doing it early because they know that people are less likely to arrive and protest early. So in case you want to be part of that, look it up. You can find it at People's Dispatch. You can also find it at Answer Coalition, ANSWER. I know Answer Coalition is leading some buses down to D.C. as well. And again, this was a short live stream to cover the breaking news of Joe Biden stepping down as the presidential candidate and Kamala Harris apparently being slotted in there without anybody's votes, without anybody's say. And I will be back tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. If you feel like these are important and you like them and you feel like you want to see this show keep going, I hope you will join up at leecamp.net, where you get all kinds of bonus coverage. Someone's asking tomorrow live stream. Yes. And tomorrow we'll be back to the normal time, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. I will see you tomorrow. And what else? Keep fighting.